Welcome back to Truck Tech, everyone. It's a new week, and of course, we have a new show for you today. It's interesting when you think about electric vehicles, you think about how much they cost, and they are expensive. The California Air Resources Board collects money from polluters. They take that money and they turn some of it into incentives for fleets to buy electric trucks. That's going to be what we talk about today on the show with Nikki Okuk, who is the deputy director of CalStart. And we're going to talk with Nikki in just a few minutes about this subject. She's got lots to talk about in terms of how small fleets are going to benefit or are benefiting already from some of this money. But first, just a couple of headlines for you. Over at Mack Truck, the cone of silence has fallen again. We don't really know what's going on inside negotiations. We do know that there was sort of an interchange between the latest demands from the United Auto Workers, who represent striking workers at Mack and the company. We know that last Thursday's new demands did not sit well with the company. We know they took a couple days to catch their breath and resume talks on Monday. Haven't really heard much since, but it's interesting. As long as the United Auto Workers are on strike against the Detroit Three, more and more of this seems to be falling into the place of Mack. And this is something that company really didn't want to happen. But as we see now that the Detroit Three are at least open to restoring cost of living adjustments, the COLA, so to speak, that is likely going to be a big issue over at Mack. It's the same thing that the UAW wants there. Is it taking action on the part of the Detroit Three to get it? Well, we'll find out. But clearly, Mack is going to need to do more to get a second tentative agreement there, and then hopefully the acquiescence of the union. So far, no impacts over at Volvo Truck from this. The Mack contract also covers the engine facility in Hagerstown, Maryland, that makes engines for both Volvo and Mack. So we'll see what happens, but that's still very much in the news. Over at Nikola, there's not a lot of good news these days, but they did get some yesterday when the arbitration panel that was listening to the two sides discuss whether Trevor Milton, the convicted founder of the company, should basically pay the cost of a Securities and Exchange Commission fine there. Trevor lost, Nikola won. Nikola is getting $165 million from Trevor now to presumably pay that fine, $125 million fine, plus some interest. Not exactly sure what Nikola is going to do with that money straight up. We may find out more during earnings. We may not. But for right now, this is good news for Nikola, not great news for Trevor Milton, who faces sentencing on his fraud convictions next month in New York. The idea that Nikola is done is fallacy. They are going after Trevor Milton for more money. They want to recover some of the tens of millions of dollars that they spent on defending him in his various court fights. So stay tuned there as well. But again, one good day for Nikola so far. Okay, let's bring in Nikki Okuk. Nikki is a former fleet owner. She'll tell us about that. But she also is the deputy director of the CalStart, which is a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to decarbonizing the fleet business, basically. Her part in this is administering the funds that CARB provides through what's called HVIP, and I never get the full name right, so I'm going to let Nikki tell us what that is. But basically, she has her hand on a lot of money that gets distributed to fleets. So, Nikki, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share what we have available with your listeners.
Yeah, well, we're going to give you that opportunity to lay that out. First, I'd like to spend a couple, I call them definitions, but a couple of explanations real quick. Give us a real quick read on what CalStart is and what it does. I said it, but I don't know if I got it exactly right. And then also sort of the mechanics of how the money that you administer through CalStart, which is from the HVIP program, basically, comes to be. Can you start there for us?
Sure, absolutely. So, CalStart is a nonprofit organization, now, in fact, international. So, we have offices all over the world working on changing transportation for good. But the majority of my work is based here in California, where CalStart is the administrator for the California HVIP program, which is a program funded by CARB, the California Air Resources Board, to provide incentives for zero emission commercial vehicles.
Okay, so basically HVIP, which we've gotten so familiar with the acronym, we barely say. I know it's hybrid bus, and can you fill in the blanks? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Point is, it's got a lot of money, really hundreds of millions. I said tens of millions, but it's really hundreds of millions of dollars that is collected. Basically, this comes from pollution fines. Is that right? People that can't meet current standards.
Yeah, so California HVIP, as you mentioned, an acronym that included things like hybrid vehicles, which it no longer does. It's been around for about 10 years. It has funded thousands of trucks and buses here in California. But the funds come from our California cap and trade investments. So there's annual auctions, and those California cap and trade investments fund lots of climate mitigation measures here in California, one of which is the California HVIP program. Again, it's been running for 10 plus years here in California, to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars every year.
Yeah, it's interesting. The OEMs, the truck makers, are always eager to say when they are qualified and when they're included in the catalog for HVIP. Most recently, I think that was probably Rizon just this week said, they're the former, they're part of Daimler Truck, as you know, and formerly we knew them as the uh, oh gosh, the Japanese company that still makes the truck. But essentially, Rizon now is in the catalog, and everybody, really from kind of that class 2B all the way up to 8 can be included for various amounts. Over time, though, this is something that has largely been attractive to large fleets that have grant writers, that have opportunities and methods and processes to get this stuff done. You've kind of turned that on its head in the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, as the state of California refocuses its climate investments around equity, we are really taking a close look at how much of the truck and fleet population in California really is comprised of small businesses. So, there are additional incentives available for small businesses, while our incentives still remain open for larger businesses. I think you mentioned that in the past, it's definitely been larger fleets, leading nationwide companies who have taken advantage of the California HVIP funding that is available. It is still open and will be available for these fleets at least for the next coming year of 2024. There is a proposal on the table for in 2025 the possibility that fleets of over 50 or $50 million in revenue would no longer be able to use California HVIP. So I really highly recommend that if you are a fleet with more than 50 vehicles or more than $50 million in revenue, you really need to take a close look at how you can utilize the California HVIP over the next year or so, because that can certainly help you with getting ready for the new advanced clean fleet regulation that's coming here in California. As for small fleets, those incentives are available for you as well at actually double the rate. So, for example, for larger fleets, the incentive for a Class 8 vehicle would be about $120,000, with additional funding available for drayage and refuse operations, disadvantaged community or pollution burdened domiciled addresses. Now, for a small fleet, it's actually double that. So, if you have less than 20 vehicles and less than 15 million in revenue, you'd be eligible for $240,000 base voucher towards a Class 8 zero emission vehicle. So that's both electric, and there are additional funding available for hydrogen fuel cell trucks.
No, it's interesting because I think we're talking probably what 9 out of 10 fleets are fewer than 20 trucks. You were a fleet owner at one point, and I don't think you had 20 trucks. But the idea being that these folks, are a little bit off put by this whole thing. You've actually done a couple other things too, I think, in terms of inviting some of these truck as a service businesses, if they play by your rules, to essentially work with these small fleets, give them the taste, but not all the burden of owning an electric truck. Is that right?
Yeah, you are absolutely right. So I came to this work having owned and operated a small drayage fleet here in Southern California. And a couple of the things that I certainly took away from that is one, small business owners are very, very busy. And it's very challenging for us to do some of the long term planning that's required to think about truck electrification, charging, infrastructure, the financing piece, of course. And so after we went out and surveyed and held focus groups with small fleets across California, we heard quite a bit of feedback. So the first bit of feedback was, of course, that they needed more funding in order to really meet this high upfront vehicle cost. Now, we know that electric trucks over the long term are much more affordable to operate as far as maintenance and fuel. And that's why big companies, once they were able to put the pen to paper and do the calculations, realized that zero emission trucks are a great investment. But it's still a very high upfront cost that can be hard for small businesses. And that's why we created that double incentive I was talking about for small fleets. Now, onto the flexibility piece. Small fleets told us they needed more flexibility. They needed more chance to sort of kick the tires and try out an electric truck in their fleet before they could make the huge commitment of moving to 100% zero emission. So, for that reason, our small fleet funding, which we call Innovative Small E Fleet, allows for additional flexibility. So, we allow for things like truck rental programs, truck sharing programs, as you mentioned, truck as a service programs. So, all of those are now allowed in this small fleet funding, so that small fleets can really have the opportunity to take advantage of what are some great operational savings and start their transition to zero emission. Even though I should mention, they're not required to do it under upcoming regulation. That regulation is really going to affect the much larger fleets. But I think small fleets can really see some real savings here, and also, as these larger fleets start looking for carriers who match their goals and match their ambitions, it will be a great business advantage for these smaller businesses to have started their zero emission transition.
Yeah, I want to go back to what you said about large fleets and the fact that you're still encouraging large fleets to participate. I can't believe large fleets aren't aware of HVIP at this point, or very many of them anyway. Now, maybe they're holding off on buying electric vehicles in total and just hoping it all goes away. But we know that's not going to happen. I hope I get this number right. But 5% of Class 8 fleets, big fleets, have to be zero emissions by 2025. And then, of course, we've got NOx regulations coming with the EPA and 2027. We've talked a lot to the OEMs about pre-buy and things like that, and whether they will, load up on current technology vehicles, which, I know CARB doesn't like it, but they're not as bad as they used to be, right? But the idea being that, they can be grandfathered in on some of the stuff, and that always seems to happen every time there's a regulation change around emissions, because the cost of the vehicles goes up anyway, and so they want to buy today's trucks rather than tomorrow's, which might be, I guess I've heard $25,000 more. But your focus, though, is on electric trucks and getting these into play. Do you feel you've reached most of the big fleets? Do they know about you in terms of what's available?
I sure hope that they do. As you mentioned, HVIP has been around for 10 years. So perhaps there's some disinformation or assumptions happening out there, right? Perhaps large fleets are thinking, oh, HVIP funding is oversubscribed every year. It goes too fast and it's too hard to access. Well, this year we have plenty of funding that is still available. So we are not closed. We are wide open. Other disinformation that I've heard is some people think that large fleets are already excluded from HVIP. That is not true. All fleet sizes are eligible to use HVIP funding. As I mentioned, that change is most likely to come in 2025. So this year, 2024, can be a very important year. I also think that we have heard some disinformation around the fact that some folks have been told by consultants that vehicles that you purchase using HVIP funding cannot be counted towards your advanced clean fleet compliance. And that is not true. That particular rule that was being sort of spread about was had to do with each program making their own decisions. And HVIP has decided that these vehicles, as long as you're buying them before your compliance deadline, can be counted towards your ACF goals. So I think that, while you mentioned lots of fleets are probably doing pre-purchase, they're probably figuring out what their compliance pathway is going to be. And I highly recommend that fleets get in touch directly with California Air Resources Board. CARB has a hotline where you can really, plan out what your compliance pathway might look like with ACF. They should all know that HVIP is not out of funding. HVIP is open to fleets of all size. HVIP is helpful in getting you towards your ACF goals. So I think maybe there's just been some misinformation. And thank you for the opportunity to come here today so that I can share with larger fleets that they need to use 2024 as an opportunity.
Well, let's talk about advanced clean fleet for a moment. My understanding is that at a certain point, whether it's HVIP funding or whatever, the trucks really cannot even accept grant money once something's in place. Once there's a regulation in place, you can't incentivize someone to follow the law. Essentially, right now, the rules are not in place. We know they're coming, but the idea that you would move it over to small fleets, of course, is fine because they're not governed by a lot of the ACF anyway. But these guys, I say these guys, these folks that have the big fleets are going to have to stand on their own anyway, right? I mean, that now they could presumably still qualify for HFIP money, IRA money, things like that, if in fact they've met their quota, and then anything they buy in addition. Are you following me? Am I correct on this? Is this all accurate?
No, your logic is absolutely right on. It's very correct, and I think that, anyone who's listening in who works in sustainability and fleet management and has trucks operating in California should listen closely to what Alan just said, right? The state of California, as a rule, does not pay for compliance. So once a rule is in effect and your compliance deadline has passed, it would be very challenging, if not impossible, to use any of these incentives towards your compliance. However, when you are, ahead of compliance or going above and beyond compliance, those are opportunities to use incentives this way. So, as I mentioned again, 2024 is going to be a really important year for large fleets to start their planning and get their purchase orders in and get their voucher incentive requests done. I should reiterate here that the HVIP program is what's called a voucher incentive program. So, it is not a grant application. It is, in fact, handled directly by your dealer. So, whoever your dealer is, when you go in and sign that purchase order, they're going to upload it to our system in order to request these voucher funds are set aside for you. So that can be done anytime in 2024, even though the truck may not be delivered or put into service, for 12 to 24 months after that. But 2024 being in advance of these compliance deadlines is going to be, like I said, very key and important time to be using incentives.
There are two more areas at least that I want to get into. One is you've been doing a lot of road shows, for around California, particularly. I'm not sure if you've been outside the state yet. To introduce fleets, and I presume it's aimed at small fleets, to electric vehicles, showing them what's available. As you said earlier, kick the tires, get an opportunity to see what's really involved, and maybe break down some of the either resistance or lack of knowledge that fleets might have about electric vehicles. Tell me a little bit about those programs and who's showing up and what kind of questions are you getting?
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is something we certainly heard when we were talking to smaller fleets across the state. We know that a lot of large companies and leaders of industry have had opportunities to try out electric and hydrogen vehicles within their fleets under pilot and demonstration projects. But the truth is that wasn't really available to small fleets. It wasn't realistic for them. So these road shows are an opportunity for them to get in the truck, drive it, really feel the power, hear how quiet it is, understand that these trucks are real and available. They are commercially available, so not just on trial, pilot, or demonstration basis. Every vehicle that is in the HVIP catalog is a commercially available vehicle that you can purchase from a dealer today. So we really hope that fleets take advantage of this opportunity to check out what's available. We just did one in San Diego, specifically targeted at the fleets that are trans-border down there in the San Diego area. We had hundreds of fleets come out. We had a dozen OEMs or so, all of the big names that you can think of. Including, Freightliner, International, the Daimler truck, the Rizon truck that you just mentioned, other born electric trucks, your BYD, Lion, Phoenix, and others were all there demonstrating their trucks, allowing drivers to get in and take a ride. And then we usually have all of the agencies there as available with information as well. So there are incentives available from the lowest, sort of closest to home, local level, things like starting with your utility. Local utilities have incredible incentive and planning assistance programs that can help fleets with their charging installation and infrastructure build out. The local air districts also have funding available through a variety of different programs. From there, we have our state funding, which are the types of programs that we administer here at CalSTART, like Energize for infrastructure, HVIP for vehicles, clean off-road equipment, forklifts, and construction and ag equipment. Um, So all of us are there on site to really help folks navigate the different levels and availability of funding and incentive programs, and to help fleets figure out how to combine them. We most recently launched a program called Cal Fleet Advisor, which is housed here at CalStart under HFIP. And the Cal Fleet Advisor program, I recommend everyone take a look at the website, which is calfleetadvisor.org, is a place where fleets can really get started with a sort of virtual project manager, right? We'll do an initial fleet assessment, take a look at what sort of routes you're using, what sort of combustion vehicles you're using, help you do some cost analysis on what this is going to cost you, but also figure out your fuel savings depending on how many miles you're driving. So we have a Cal Fleet Advisor service that we also take on these road shows. They sit out there at tables to help fleets to understand how to use the incentives and get into their first electric vehicle. And then very often CARB is always there with their regulation and compliance specialists. They also have tables out to meet one on one with fleets and help them understand what their compliance obligations are.
Yeah, I'm not sure if your fleet as a service really is kind of what you're describing in terms of what you're offering. And I presume that's a pay for play. Maybe it's not. If it's free, it's a great deal because truthfully, every OEM and just about every startup in the infrastructure space and everywhere along the way is offering consulting services, right? I mean, they'll help you write grants. I think the first time I heard of it was probably 2 or 3 years ago at the ACT Expo, when Navistar mentioned they had a grant writer. And I think Kenworth has grant writers. Everybody now has grant writers to help get this done. But getting sort of the stacking of incentives, state stuff, and even I guess federal IRA money and things like that, that gets a little more complicated again. Is your service free for the asking, or do you charge for that?
Yeah, Cal Fleet Advisor is a complimentary service, and our goal is not to replace those incredible service providers that you mentioned that are offered by OEMs and dealers alike. What we just want to do is help fleets find those services, right? So if a fleet comes in and says, hey, I'm mostly medium duty box truck and I operate in this region of the state, then we can maybe help them find the right dealer, put them in touch with their utility program, follow up with them and making sure that they're getting the responses that they need. So we want to connect folks with all of the resources that are already out there because we know that it can be overwhelming, especially for small business owners, to try to navigate all of those different resources.
Sure. Governor Newsom is claiming credit, and probably you deserve some of it, for California exceeding its goals in terms of clean trucks as well as, I guess, cars. But he's come out now and said that you're about 2 years ahead of where you expected to be on adoption of electric vehicles. And I have to believe that even though we hear so much about Class 8 drayage vehicles, and those are the big programs and the pilot programs and so forth, the sales really are going to medium duty, aren't they? I mean, that's where the simplest math is done. That's where the earliest cost of ownership to TOC or total ownership cost really pencils out faster. Is that your understanding? I mean, are the medium duties really making this happen?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So there's just been a massive acceleration in model availability for sure. Just in the past few years, we've added hundreds of models to the HVIP catalog. And as you mentioned, the vast majority of the medium heavy duty commercial vehicle on road population here in California is going to be step vans, delivery trucks, smaller straight trucks, right? So it is in the smaller classes. And those are the ones that, as you said, infrastructure can be a lot simpler, a lot less expensive. The ranges that are available for those vehicles really make it an easy application to electrify. While we do see lots of attention given to, of course, the Class 8 drayage operations, and will there be a long haul option, in the near future? We do know that the low hanging fruit is certainly in those ones that have a very straightforward total cost of ownership, really easy fuel savings, and lots of models available now.
Sure. Nikki, this has been great. I feel like we could do another 15 minutes just in this subject, so I won't even get into the other stuff I had for you. But thank you so much for being with us today. I'm really glad you could come on and talk about this. There's a lot of hoops to go through, I think, even though it's meant to be simple. But we really appreciate having you today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope everybody takes a look at the CaliforniaHFIP.org website, the CalFleetAdvisor.org website. We are here to help and happy to share any information that we can about how to utilize these incentive programs.
Great. Well, we'll catch up with you down the road. Great to talk to you. Have a great day. Okay, folks, that's it for this week. Next week we're going to be on the road again, actually in Nikki's state out in California. We're going to be going to ride and drive the Mack Trucks MD electric truck up in Sonoma. We'll have a report on that next week for you, probably with some video. We try to do that where we can. And I'm not sure what else we'll fill out the show with, but we'll try to make it interesting and informative for you. You can catch all of our episodes on FreightWaves YouTube channel. Click on shows and then Truck Tech, and you'll get a full playlist that will let you walk through previous episodes. And we hope you'll do that as well. Thanks very much for being here today. Have a great week.